There are men who seem to belong to another world entirely. Men whose faces have graced 1,000 movie posters, whose names echo through decades of cinema like a recurring note in a song you can never quite forget. And then there is the private person behind that face, the one who walks through airports with his head down, who sits in subway cars beside strangers who have no idea they're sitting next to one of the most famous human beings alive. What happens when the person the world loves most is also the person who has learned, through unbearable repetition, that love always comes with a cost? What happens when the man the world calls immortal on screen has buried more grief in his real life than most people will ever be asked to carry? And what is it about a single photograph, taken not on a red carpet, not on a film set, but on an ordinary London street on an ordinary gray afternoon, that tells you everything you need to know about who Keanu Reeves really is? Hold on to that photograph. We're going to come back to it. Keanu Charles Reeves was born on September 2nd, 1964, in Beirut, Lebanon, a city that even then carried the weight of ancient tensions just beneath the surface of its beauty. His mother, Patricia Taylor, was a young English woman working as a costume designer and performer, a woman of warmth and creativity who had traveled far from her roots in search of something she could not quite name. His father, Samuel Nowlin Reeves Jr., was a man of Hawaiian and Chinese descent, a geologist who moved through life with the restlessness of someone who was always looking for the next thing, the next place, the next beginning. They were an unlikely pair, and their marriage was as combustible as it was colorful. Keanu would not know stability as a child. He would know movement instead, constant, disorienting movement. By the time Keanu was 3 years old, his father had abandoned the family. Just gone. No dramatic scene, no tearful farewell, just an absence that arrived one morning and never left. His mother packed what she could and moved with her children to Sydney, then to New York, then eventually to Toronto, where she would build a new life and marry again and again and again. 4 times in total. For different stepfathers cycling through Keanu's childhood bedroom, like visitors who didn't quite know how long they were staying. For a boy who desperately needed an anchor, this was a childhood that felt perpetually unmoored. He attended 4 different high schools. He never finished. He was later diagnosed with dyslexia, which explained the difficulty he had with text, but could not explain the deeper feeling, the sense that no matter where he went, he was slightly outside the frame of everyone else's life. What it did give him, however, was something rarer than stability. It gave him the ability to observe, to sit quietly in the corner of a room and watch people the way a naturalist watches animals in the wild, with genuine curiosity, without judgment, with a patience that felt almost unnatural in a teenager. His teachers at the La Salle College in Toronto noticed it. His hockey coaches noticed it too, because before cinema ever claimed him, the ice claimed him first. He was a gifted goalkeeper, quick, instinctive, willing to take the puck to the face and get back up without complaint. There is something almost prophetic about that. The man who would one day become the most beloved action star of his generation spent his boyhood as the one who stood still while everything flew at him, absorbing impact on behalf of everyone else. His relationship with his father was the wound that never fully closed. Samuel Reeves drifted in and out of Keanu's life with a casualness that must have felt like cruelty, even if it wasn't intended that way. When Keanu was 13, his father was arrested for heroin possession in Hawaii, not for the first time and not for the last. The image of that arrest, the knowledge of it, the way it must have landed on a 13-year-old boy who was already trying to understand what men were supposed to be. That is the kind of thing you carry in your chest for the rest of your life. You don't talk about it at dinner parties. You don't put it in interviews. You learn to fold it small and tuck it somewhere deep, and you keep moving. His father was later imprisoned. They lost contact entirely. And Keanu Reeves, the boy who would one day be asked in 1,000 interviews what it felt like to be loved by millions, had learned very early that the first man who was supposed to love him simply didn't stay. That is the wound at the center of everything. It explains the gentleness, the extraordinary, almost puzzling gentleness of a man who could convincingly destroy entire rooms full of people on screen and then step off set and hold a door open for a stranger with genuine warmth in his eyes. When you grow up waiting to be left, you either become someone who leaves first, or you become someone who tries, with everything you have, to be the kind of person worth staying for. Keanu chose the second path. It cost him enormously. By his early 20s, he had made his way to Los Angeles, the city of beautiful promises and spectacular heartbreaks, where he slept on a friend's floor and drove a motorcycle through the canyons and auditioned for anything he could find. He was not an immediate sensation. His early roles were small, forgettable, a Canadian hockey player here, a bit part there. The industry was not sure what to do with him. He was too unusual. His face didn't fit a category. He spoke slowly and listened carefully and didn't do the performative desperation that young actors in Hollywood typically wore like a costume. He was patient. He waited. And then came River Phoenix. River Phoenix was the kind of person who arrives in your life and rearranges the furniture. The person whose brilliance is so evident, so incandescent, that being near them makes the whole world seem slightly more possible. Keanu and River became close friends during the filming of My Own Private Idaho in 1991, a raw, aching film about young men living on the margins, about longing and loss, and the particular vulnerability of people who have been taught that they are disposable. The two actors inhabited that film completely, giving performances that felt less like acting and more like truth. River Phoenix was 23 years old on October 31st, 1993, when he collapsed outside the Viper Room on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood and died of a drug overdose. It was Halloween night. The street was full of people in costumes, and then it was full of horror. Keanu was not there when it happened, but the loss, sudden, violent, incomprehensible, hit him in a place that had never quite healed. He had watched his father disappear. Now one of the few people who had truly seen him, who had stood beside him in the creative darkness and brought something real into the light, was simply gone. He didn't speak publicly about River's death for years. That restraint, that absolute privacy with his deepest grief, was something he had learned long before Hollywood. You carry it. You keep moving. You find the next thing. But the next thing, when it came, was almost too much to survive. In 1999, Keanu Reeves and his then-girlfriend Jennifer Syme were expecting a baby girl. They had named her Ava Archer Syme Reeves. 8 months into the pregnancy, Ava was stillborn. The word stillborn is one of those words that the English language has never quite managed to make mean what it actually means, a word that contains an entire universe of grief in its 2 flat syllables. A word that parents who have experienced it will tell you never captures the reality of what it feels like to hold a child who will never open her eyes. Keanu and Jennifer buried their daughter together. And then, in the way that grief sometimes does, it began to pull them apart. They separated in early 2000. 18 months later, on April 2nd, 2001, Jennifer Syme died in a car accident in Los Angeles. She was 28 years old. She had been driving after a party when her car struck a row of parked vehicles on Cahuenga Boulevard. She was thrown from the vehicle. She died almost instantly. In less than 2 years, Keanu Reeves had lost his child and then the mother of his child. He had watched love arrive and be taken, twice, in the most brutal possible way. He was 36 years old. There are no interviews about this period that feel adequate to the reality of it. There are a few photographs. In one of them, taken in London, on an ordinary street, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, he is sitting alone on a bench. He is wearing plain dark clothes. He is looking at the ground. He has a sandwich beside him that he appears to have forgotten. He does not know he is being photographed. His face, in that moment, holds an expression that has no name. Not quite sadness, not quite emptiness, but something in between, something that looks like a man trying to remember what he is doing here, in this world, in this moment, in this life. That photograph went around the internet years later under the title Sad Keanu. People found it funny at first. Then they looked at it longer and stopped laughing. Because something in it, something in the particular quality of that solitude, reached through the screen and touched something real. That photograph is the most honest portrait of him that exists. And it was taken by a stranger at a moment when he thought he was invisible. He almost stepped away from everything. Not in a dramatic, announced way. Keanu Reeves has never been dramatic about his own suffering, but in the quiet way of a man who is genuinely unsure whether he has enough left to keep going. He turned down roles. He withdrew. He rode his motorcycle through the canyons alone, the way he had always done, and he tried to figure out what the point of it was, when the things that mattered most could vanish so completely and so fast. What brought him back was, of all things, a book, or more precisely, the act of reading. His sister Kim, who would later be diagnosed with leukemia, yes, there was more, gave him a collection of Rainer Maria Rilke's letters, the famous letters to a young poet, in which the German poet writes about grief and silence and the necessity of living through the difficult things rather than around them. Rilke wrote that we must assume our existence as broadly as we in any way can. Keanu read that, and something in him, some stubborn, almost irrational core of continuity, decided to stay. He returned to the set of something, and then something else. And then, in 2003, a project arrived that would remind the world, and himself, of what he was capable of. The Matrix had already changed everything in 1999. In the year of his deepest personal devastation, he had delivered one of the most iconic performances in modern film history as Neo, a man who discovers that the reality he believed in is a fabrication, who must choose to see the world as it truly is even when the truth is terrifying. The parallels are almost too obvious to state. A man whose entire constructed life has been pulled out from under him, who must find a way to keep moving through a world that doesn't play by the rules he was taught. Keanu inhabited Neo not as a character, but as a feeling he already knew intimately. The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions followed in 2003. The franchise had become cultural mythology. Keanu Reeves was not just a movie star. He was a symbol. The one. The chosen. The man who could bend the rules of reality with his hands. And all of it was built on top of a grief so heavy that most people would never have stood up under it. He gave enormous portions of his Matrix earnings to the crew, the special effects team, the costume department, the stunt coordinators. Not in a press release way. Not in a way designed to generate headlines. He simply transferred money into their accounts and said almost nothing about it publicly. It came out later, through the people who received it. They described finding out as one of the strangest and most moving experiences of their professional lives. A man famous for playing a savior who quietly tries to take care of the people around him without anyone noticing. There is a kind of philosophy in that, if you're paying attention. His sister Kim was diagnosed with leukemia in 1991, and she battled it for years. Bone marrow transplants, chemotherapy, the grinding, unglamorous warfare of serious illness that does not pause for anyone's film schedule or emotional capacity. Keanu spent years as her primary support, quietly financing her treatment, visiting her in hospitals, being present in the way that his father had never been present for him. He has never spoken extensively about it in interviews because it is not his pain to display, it is hers. But those who know him have described the devotion with which he showed up for her as something that reframes everything else about who he is. He also founded a private charitable foundation to support children's hospitals and cancer research. He did not put his name on it. For years, people in the industry knew it existed, but almost no one outside knew the details. He did not want the credit. He wanted the children to have the treatment. That is the man, not the movie star, not the action hero, the man. And then came something he had genuinely stopped believing in. Love. or more precisely, the return of it, in a form he had never expected. Alexandra Grant is a visual artist, dark-eyed, silver-haired, formidably intelligent, a woman who makes art about language and meaning and the beautiful difficulty of human communication. She and Keanu had been friends for over a decade before anything changed between them. She had illustrated a book of his poetry. They had collaborated on creative projects. They had sat in rooms together and talked, at length, about things that mattered. And somewhere in that long, careful friendship, something shifted. They were photographed together at a LACMA event in November 2019, and Alexandra Grant walked the red carpet beside him with her silver hair loose and her eyes bright and her hand in his, and Keanu Reeves. This man who had kept everything private for so long, who had learned to protect his heart with absolute discipline, was smiling. Not a red carpet smile, not a performance smile, a real one. The internet reacted with the kind of uncomplicated joy that is rare and genuinely touching. People wrote that they were so glad he had found happiness. They wrote it as if they knew him, as if his well-being was something they had a personal stake in, because in some strange and entirely legitimate way, they did. He had given them so much art, so many hours of beauty and excitement and emotion. And he had done it while carrying a weight that most of them hadn't known about. The idea that he had found someone to sit beside him on the bench was something people needed to believe in.